Hello, everyone. My name is Lako, and I'm a licensed board certified behavior analyst and the acting clinical director here at Children's Milestone. Thank you for being here and for taking the time to engage in this very important conversation. This presentation is part one of a series on assent-based practices, a foundational pillar of practice here at Children's Milestone. Assent-based practices are not just a trend. They represent a meaningful shift in how we understand ethical responsibility, power, and humanity within applied behavior analysis. For a long time, our field focused heavily on behavior modification, on changing behavior because we could. What we are recognizing now is that ethical practice requires more than just technical effectiveness. It requires humane treatment, respect for autonomy, and an ongoing commitment to dignity. Assent-based practices are revolutionizing how we practice as BCBAs because they ask a different question. Not just, does this intervention work, but is this intervention experienced as respectful, safe, and collaborative? This series is about moving beyond control and compliance and toward ethical, compassionate care that centers the lived experience of the people we serve. Today's session, The Behavior of Love, focuses in on that ethical foundation of that shift. Because before we can truly practice assent-based care, we must be willing to examine how our behavior communicates respect, autonomy, and humanity, especially when things are difficult. The title of this presentation may feel unfamiliar or even uncomfortable for a field grounded in objectivity and measurement. The phrase, the behavior of love, is not language we typically associate with applied behavior analysis, and that tension is intentional. In our field, we are very comfortable talking about reinforcement, extinction, generalization, and fidelity. We are far less comfortable naming love, even when our ethical code implicitly demands it. So let me be very clear about how I am using that word today. When I say the behavior of love, I am not referring to emotion, sentiment, warmth, or personal affection. I am referring to observable, repeatable patterns of responding that protect dignity, autonomy, and well-being, particularly in moments of distress, disagreement, or power imbalance. In that sense, love is not a feeling. It is a professional behavior pattern, and therefore it belongs squarely within the scope of applied behavior analysis. Today's presentation is not asking us to care more. It is asking us to behave more ethically, more consistently, and more intentionally in ways that can be taught, observed, and supported over time. Let's do a little housekeeping to ensure you receive your CEU credit. To receive your CE certificate, you'll need to identify the 3 secret words in this presentation, complete a survey, which includes a brief quiz and feedback. This is required for verification and certificate issuance. You must pass the quiz with 80% accuracy in order to earn your certificate. The feedback survey can be found in the Word document that allowed you to access this presentation, as well as the Children's Milestone, BCBA Ethical Inventory, and the Observer-Based Compassion Checklist. You can also find the inventory and checklist in Rethink under the Assent-Based Care folder. Once your submission is completed and verified, your CE certificate will be issued. Again, the handouts are also available today for you in Rethink as well as the Word document. This CE is designed to be practical and meaningful. It is not meant to be an inspirational talk that feels good but changes nothing. By the end of this session, you should be able to describe love and compassion behaviorally rather than emotionally. You should be able to recognize how ethics show up or fail to show up in everyday clinical interactions. You should also leave with a clearer understanding of how ethical behavior can be supported, protected, and made more consistent across practitioners and systems. Most importantly, you should walk away with at least one area of your own practice that you can evaluate more intentionally through an ethical lens. Throughout the presentation, you will also be asked a series of self-reflection questions, so be sure to have a writing mechanism available. If you need time, please pause the recording. Applied behavior analysis is effective. That is not what is being debated. What is being questioned, increasingly and publicly, is how ABA is experienced by the people receiving it. In their 2019 article, Compassionate Care and Behavior Analytic Treatment, Taylor, LeBlanc, and Nosek note that many challenges in ABA service delivery are not technical failures, but relational ones. They argue that compassion directly affects treatment acceptability, caregiver engagement, and long-term adherence, all outcomes that are ethically relevant. Similarly, Rodriguez, Tarbox, and Tarbox, in their 2023 paper, Compassion in Autism Services, describe ABA philosophically compassionate, but not always applied in a compassionate manner. That distinction is critical. Ethics violations in ABA are rarely about whether reinforcement works. They are about whether people feel heard, respected, and safe within the process. Those experiences are shaped by behavior, not intention. Our first secret word is dignity. Please take a moment to write that down. Dignity is the foundation of ethical assent-based practice. It shows up in how we speak, how we listen, and how we respond when someone is vulnerable or struggling. In applied behavior analysis, dignity means prioritizing the humanity of the person over the efficiency of the procedure. When dignity is protected, learning can occur within a relationship that feels safe, respectful, and collaborative. One of the most fundamental principles in behavior analysis is that intent does not equal impact. This principle applies directly to ethics. We may intend to be compassionate. We may value respect. We may care deeply about our families and our clients. But ethical practice is not measured by what we intended. It is measured by what occurred and how it is experienced by the other person. Rodriguez and colleagues emphasize this when they define compassion as a measurable repertoire, not an internal state. If ethics cannot be observed in behavior, they cannot reliably protect the people we serve. When love and compassion are treated as personality traits rather than professional behaviors, ethical care becomes inconsistent. Rohrer and Weiss, in their 2022 study on teaching compassion skills to behavior analysis students, found that compassion responding does not reliably emerge without explicit instruction and feedback. In other words, even well-intentioned clinicians may respond rigidly under stress if compassion has never been trained. From an ethical standpoint, this creates inequity. Clients receive different levels of dignity depending on who is assigned to their case. Ethical care should not be dependent on temperament or burnout. It must be systematically supported. At this point, I want to slow us down and be very precise about what we mean by the behavior of love. because this definition is what anchors the rest of our presentation. In the literature, we see a consistent distinction between sympathy, empathy, and compassion. Sympathy refers to feeling concern for someone. Empathy refers to understanding another person's internal experience. Compassion, however, goes further. In their 2019 paper, Compassionate Care and Behavior Analytic Treatment, Taylor et al. Defined compassion as empathy translated into action for the purpose of alleviating suffering. That definition is critically important for behavior analysts because it moves compassion out of the private event category and into the realm of observable behavior. Rodriguez and colleagues, in their 2023 framework on compassion in autism services, build on this by emphasizing that compassion must be expressed through overt clinician behavior, not inferred from intention or attitude. When we talk about the behavior of love in ABA, we are talking about a pattern of compassionate action over time, not isolated moments of warmth or kindness. This framing allows love to function as an ethical construct rather than a sentimental one. Love, in this sense, is not about how we feel about our clients. It is how our behavior consistently protects their dignity, autonomy, and well-being. Once we define love behaviorally, we can begin to see it as an ethical pattern of responding rather than a personal quality. Love shows up in ABA when clinicians consistently choose dignity over efficiency, collaboration over control, and humility over authority, especially when doing so is uncomfortable or inconvenient. Penny and colleagues, in their discussion of compassion as an eighth dimension of applied behavior analysis, argue that focusing solely on outcomes without attending to how interventions are experienced creates ethical blind spots. Ethical decision-making is not only about whether an intervention works, it is also about whether the process respects the humanity of the person receiving it. These are not soft decisions. They are ethical judgments about harm, benefit, and autonomy, the same concerns that underlie any ethical framework in healthcare. Ethical principles only protect people when they are translated into behavior, and behavior only remains reliable when systems support it. One of the most common ethical failures in practice is assuming that because clinicians value ethics, ethical behavior will naturally occur under all conditions. Behavior analysis teaches us the opposite. Without clear expectations, feedback, and self-monitoring, behavior drifts, even with behavior we care about deeply. Measurement, reflection, and training are not alternatives to ethics. They are the mechanisms by which ethics survive real-world conditions such as time pressure, burnout, and competing demands. Let's talk concretely about what the behavior of love looks like in applied settings. Ethical love may mean slowing the pace of an intervention when a caregiver is feeling overwhelmed, even when the data suggests progress. Rodriguez and colleagues caution against prioritizing procedural fidelity at the expense of family well-being, noting that ethical practice requires flexibility when harm is possible. Ethical love may mean revisiting expectations when resistance appears, rather than increasing demands or attributing noncompliance to motivation alone. It may mean inviting collaboration before finalizing plans, or receiving feedback without defensiveness when concerns are raised. These behaviors protect dignity and autonomy. They also protect the long-term integrity of our work. Measurement is often misunderstood in conversations about compassion. Measuring compassionate behavior is not about policing kindness. It exists because ethical commitments are vulnerable to erosion over time, particularly under stress. Taylor and colleagues emphasize that compassionate care must be reliable, not occasional. Measurement helps ensure that ethical behavior does not depend on personality, mood, or burnout. It protects clients by making ethics visible and discussable. This leads to our second secret word, accountability. Please write that down as well. In ethical practice, accountability is not about blame or punishment. Accountability means being willing to look honestly at whether our behavior aligns with our values, especially when situations are stressful or outcomes may be uncomfortable. In ABA, accountability requires us to move beyond intention and ask, what did my behavior communicate to the other person? Accountability is what allows ethics to remain active rather than assumed. Now let's put these theories into actions. One of the most effective ways to protect ethical practice is through intentional self-monitoring. The BCBA Ethical Self-Inventory you're going to be introduced to today was developed by Children's Milestone Leadership, informed by the applied behavior analysis literature on compassion, ethics, and humane care. It is designed to help clinicians examine patterns of behavior over time rather than isolated incidents or single interactions. The inventory asks reflective questions, such as, do I consistently slow down when distress appears? Do I invite collaboration before making final decisions? Do I model the same dignity with staff that I expect them to show clients? Rodriguez and colleagues emphasize that ethical practice requires ongoing self-reflection, not just adherence to a professional code. This inventory is not meant to be submitted, scored, or used punitively. It is intended to support ethical growth, not to evaluate performance. Instead, it functions as an ethical self-monitoring tool, similar to how we monitor treatment fidelity or supervision quality, to help ensure alignment between our stated values and our day-to-day behavior. Each item on the self-inventory is rated using a 4-point scale. A rating of 1 indicates that the behavior occurs rarely or inconsistently. A rating of 2 indicates that the behavior occurs sometimes, but not reliably. A rating of 3 indicates that the behavior occurs often. And a rating of 4 indicates that the behavior occurs consistently across situations. There is no passing score. The purpose of this scale is to simply support honest reflection about patterns of behavior over time. Domain 1. Attentive presence. Attentive presence is the foundation of ethical care. It refers to the ability to slow down, attend fully, and respond deliberately when distress, uncertainty, or vulnerability is present. In applied behavior analysis, attentive presence means prioritizing the person over the procedure, recognizing that ethical decision making begins with noticing, listening, and pausing before acting. Without attentive presence, even well-designed interventions risk becoming mechanical rather than humane. Do you slow your pace down when distress or overwhelm is present for yourself or the listener? Do you listen fully before responding, even when time is limited? Do you avoid multitasking during sensitive conversations? Do you acknowledge emotional cues, not just verbal content? I invite you to take a minute to review these different facets of attentive presence. Write down your score for yourself and reflect. Do I do these things, or are these areas that I need to improve upon? Let's move on to domain number 2, perspective taking. Perspective taking is a core ethical skill that supports dignity, collaboration, and trust. It refers to the ability to actively consider another person's context, history, and experience before responding or making decisions. In applied behavior analysis, perspective taking means recognizing that behavior occurs within complex and environmental systems, and that ethical care requires curiosity rather than assumption. Without perspective taking, clinical decisions risk becoming rigid, dismissive, or unintentionally harmful. Let's review some reflection questions. Do you actively seek to understand the perspective of caregivers, clients, or staff before responding? Do you check assumptions when resistance, disagreement, or emotion arise? Do you consider contextual variables such as stress, culture, history, or competing demands? Do you adjust your response based on what you learn about the other person's experience? Take a few moments to review these different facets. Write down your score and self-reflect. Do I have strengths in this area? Or are these areas that I need to focus in on and improve? Let's move forward. Domain 3, compassionate action. Compassionate action is the behavioral expression of empathy and ethical responsibility. It refers to taking observable steps to reduce stress, prevent harm, or support well-being when ethical concerns arise. In applied behavior analysis, compassionate action means allowing ethics to guide decisions, even when doing so requires slowing progress, adjusting expectations, or revising plans. Without compassionate action, empathy remains internal and ethics remains theoretical. Let's look at the reflective questions. Do you take action to reduce stress when it is observed rather than waiting for it to escalate? Do you adjust demands or expectations when ethical concerns arise, even if data appear favorable? Do you intervene to protect dignity and well-being, not just to increase compliance? Do your actions reflect a commitment to humane care, especially under pressure? Take a few moments to reflect, give yourself a score, and then identify areas of strength and maybe areas which need to be concentrated on in your practice. Domain 4, collaboration and autonomy. Collaboration and autonomy are essential components of ethical assent-based practice. They refer to the intentional inclusion of others in decision-making and the respect for an individual's right to consent, dissent, and participate meaningfully. In applied behavior analysis, collaboration means sharing power, inviting input, honoring disagreement, and explaining rationale transparently. Without collaboration and autonomy, care risks becoming coercive rather than ethical. So get the reflection questions. Do you invite input from clients, caregivers, or staff before finalizing decisions? Do you respond respectfully to disagreement or hesitation? Do you explain clinical rationale without relying on authority or position? Do your interactions support autonomy rather than compliance alone? Take a moment and score how you feel you do within these different facets. What areas do you have strengths in? What areas do you feel could use some improvement? Domain 5, leadership modeling. Leadership modeling is the ethical transmission of values through behavior. It refers to how clinicians demonstrate dignity, compassion, and accountability in their interactions with others. In applied behavior analysis, leadership modeling means recognizing that ethics are learned through observation, not policy alone. Without ethical modeling, expectations of humane practice cannot be reliably sustained. Let's take a look at the reflection questions. Do you model the same dignity with staff that you expect them to show to clients? Do you receive feedback with openness rather than defensiveness? Do you acknowledge and repair missteps when they occur? Do your everyday behaviors reflect the ethical standards you promote? Take a few minutes to reflect and score. Let's take a look at the entire ethical self inventory. Which domain feels strongest right now to you? Which domain feels most vulnerable under stress? What is one behavior of love you will intentionally strengthen? Take a moment and reflect. Write down your answers. This may be on your quiz. In addition to self-reflection, ethics are strengthened when behavior is observable to others. The Children's Milestone Observer-Based Compassion Checklist allows supervisors to support ethical consistency without relying on assumptions or personality judgments. In addition to this, we will use this additional tool to help for coaching, reflection, and supervision. This helps us notice whether ethical values are actually showing up in behavior over time. Like the BCBA self-inventory, this checklist focuses on patterns, not isolated moments, and is not intended to be used punitively. Like the BCBA ethical self-inventory rating scale, each item on the observer-based compassion checklist is rated using a 4-point scale, with a 1 indicating the behavior occurs rarely, to a 4 indicating the behaviors are observed consistently across settings. This tool is designed specifically for coaching and reflective supervision, particularly when observing BTs and RBTs in the field. It is focused on patterns of behavior over time, not isolated moments or single sessions. There is no passing score associated with this checklist. Ethical, compassionate care cannot be reduced to a number or threshold. This is not an evaluative or punitive tool, and is not meant to be used for discipline. Instead, it exists to support ethical consistency, reflective supervision, and humane assent-based practice, especially in real-world conditions where technicians are balancing learning goals, regulation, and humane connection. Domain 1. Attentive presence. When we use the observer-based compassion checklist in the field, attentive presence refers to how a technician shows up moment to moment with the learner. From an observer's perspective, this includes whether the BT or RBT slows their pace when the learner appears dysregulated, confused, or overwhelmed. For example, attentive presence may look like pausing instruction when a learner shows signs of distress, rather than continuing to run targets simply because they are scheduled. Observers are not evaluating productivity or efficiency. They are noting whether the technician is attending to the learner as a person, not just the task at hand. Attentive presence is often the first indicator of humane assent-based care in direct services. Perspective taking in the field refers to how a technician interprets and responds to learner behavior. Observers look for whether the BT or RBT demonstrates curiosity about what the learner may be communicating, rather than immediately labeling behavior as noncompliance or avoidance. For example, perspective taking may look like a technician adjusting expectations when a learner appears tired, frustrated, or overstimulated, instead of insisting on task completion. This domain is not about guessing internal states. It's about whether the technician responds flexibly and compassionately to observable cues. Perspective taking protects against rigid responses that can unintentionally escalate distress. Compassionate action is where ethical values become most visible in direct care. In this domain, observers look for whether the technician takes observable steps to reduce distress or prevent escalation when a learner is struggling. For example, compassionate action may involve offering a break, modifying demands, changing the activity, or supporting regulation before returning to instruction. This domain is not about reinforcing escape or reducing expectations permanently. It is about responding humanely in the moment to protect the well-being and maintain trust. Compassionate action reflects a technician's ability to balance learning goals with ethical care. Dignity and respect are communicated continuously through a technician's language, tone, and physical presence. Observers look for whether the BT or RBT uses respectful, non coercive language and avoids power based or shaming responses. For example, dignity may be reflected in offering choices, honoring a learner's signals to pause, or using neutral language instead of labeling behavior as bad or wrong. Ethical care must not only be respectful in intent, it must feel respectful to the learner. This domain helps ensure that interventions remain humane, even during challenging moments. In direct care, collaboration and assent refer to how a technician responds to the learner's communication, both verbal and nonverbal. Observers look for whether the BT or RBT notices the honor and honors assent signals, such as engagement, withdrawal resistance, or requests for breaks. For example, collaboration may involve offering alternatives, checking in with the learner, or modifying activities rather than insisting on compliance. This domain is not about eliminating structure or expectations. It is about ensuring that participation is voluntary, supported, and respectful as possible. Collaboration and assent are foundational to ethical, humane ABA practice. Leadership modeling shows up in a variety of different facets as a practitioner. Be sure to acknowledge this as you move forward, as what you do models how your technicians will respond in the future. Again, ethics are not primarily transmitted through manuals or trainings. They are transmitted behaviorally. How BCBAs treat RBTs shape how RBTs treat clients. Compassion, or its absence, is replicated through modeling. Ethical leadership, therefore, is not about stating values, it's about demonstrating them consistently. Our final secret word is humility. Please take a moment to write that down. Humility is essential in a field grounded in expertise and authority. It is the willingness to recognize that we can be technically skilled and still need to learn, adjust, or repair. Humility allows us to listen, to change course when needed, and to remain responsive to the people we serve. Without humility, ethics becomes rigid. With humility, ethics remain humane. These reflective questions are designed to be used through a field observation lens, specifically when observing BTs and RBTs during direct care. What patterns of compassionate responding do I observe with my technician during direct care? The first question invites you to notice patterns of compassionate responding, not just whether compassion appears, but how consistently it shows up across sessions and contexts. When are technicians more likely to offer assent-based care? The second question asks you to consider when technicians offer assent-based humane care. This might be during well-paced sessions, clear expectations, or strong supervisory support. Under what conditions does compassionate responding become more difficult to maintain? The third question encourages reflection on the conditions under which compassionate responding becomes harder to sustain, such as time pressure, high demand situations, or challenging transitions. And finally, the last question shifts to the focus back to supervision. Rather than asking, what should the technician do differently, it asks, how can supervision better support ethical, humane practice in those moments? These reflections are not about critique or correction. They exist to strengthen coaching, protect dignity, and support consistent, assent-based care in real-world conditions. In conclusion, the behavior of love in applied behavior analysis is observable, teachable, and ethically necessary. It is not an add-on. It is not optional. It is the standard by which ethical practice should be judged. To receive your CE certificate, you will need to complete the Children's Milestone CEU feedback survey. This survey will be entered into the chat shortly. The survey and is also available for you on the page that led you to this very presentation. The survey, which includes a brief quiz and feedback from you, is required for verification and certificate issuance. You must pass the quiz with 80% accuracy in order to earn your certificate. You will also need to note the 3 secret words. The feedback survey can be found on the Word document, as well as in the Children's Milestone BCBA Ethical Self-Inventory, and the Observer-Based Compassion Checklist can be found in Rethink, as well as the page you utilize to access this presentation. If you need assistance, please feel free to reach out to me at dianalakocd@childrensmilestone.org, and I will work to ensure your CEU is available to you. Thank you for your time, your attention, and for engaging thoughtfully in this conversation. The behavior of love in our field shows up not in perfection, but in our ongoing commitment to dignity, accountability, and humility in practice.